All right. Good evening, everyone. This is the Tuesday, June 20th, 2023 Planning Board meeting. It's 7:02 p.m. And thank you all for tuning in. I do have a brief official notice I have to read here on remote meetings. Bear with me. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, that includes extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, this meeting with the West Newbury Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Members of the public who wish to view and or listen to the meeting may do so using Zoom by calling the phone number or using the video link as noted on our official meeting notice. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of West Newbury website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as practicable after the meeting. So that's official stuff out of the way. We typically will just introduce the planning board members. I'm Brian Murphy, and I am the chair for this this upcoming year.
I'm Ray Cook, just planning board member.
Ann Bardine, planning board member.
Deb Hamilton, planning board member.
Hi, Tim Cronin, planning board member.
And thank you. And tonight we have a presentation discussion on the MBTA Communities Act and its impact and requirements for West Newbury. Our consultants, Dodson and Flinker, are here. They'll provide an excellent presentation, I'm sure, about this. And I'm going to let our planner, Sue Brown, fill in on a few of the pieces here and then introduce Dodson and Flinker.
Thanks, Brian. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Sue Brown. I'm West Newbury's town planner since October, and I'm the project manager for this planning initiative, and I'm a staff to the planning board. So I just want you all to know that if at any time you have any questions or want to share information or thoughts about this planning initiative or any other planning initiative, that you can reach out to me by phone or email or stopping by my office here at the town office building. And I'm going to turn this over to the board's consultant team, Dodson and Flinker. The team joined us back in, I think it was April, on a unanimous recommendation by the planning board. They've been busy researching and studying your town as part of the process to help the board and the community understand its options for zoning for multifamily housing. And I'm going to pass it over either to Dylan, maybe, or Peter. And I've asked that they would introduce the rest of their team, and they will be facilitating for the rest of this meeting.
Thanks, Sue. I guess I'll start. I'm Peter Flinker. I'm the president of Dodson and Flinker. We're landscape architects and planners, very much concerned about protecting what's special about the rural landscape in places like West Newbury, even as time and development continue. And really, a lot of our work focuses on helping towns figure out how to maintain their so-called rural character, sense of place, and the things that provide such a high quality of life in places like West Newbury, but at the same time allow for the growth and development that's appropriate to continue and that you perhaps need to maintain a healthy economy and jobs and homes for people to live. And this kind of effort is very typical of the kind of work we do, is trying to figure out where is growth appropriate, where is conservation appropriate, and how do we provide, in this case, for housing, which the state is requiring, in a way that best fits into the town. So we're really approaching this week's meeting and next week's meeting, which will be in person, as kind of an experiment in looking at, where are possible places for housing in the town? What could it look like? And does it necessarily have to be a bad thing? So I'm here with Dylan Sussman, who's going to present sort of information that we've learned and sort of lead tonight's exercises. Also, we have Eli Block and Jack Sweetie Taylor who are going to help facilitate tonight. Take it away, Dylan.
Peter, I'm gonna share my screen.
I don't think they can hear me. I think I have mine on. Pinch out for bigger.
Did the screen sharing work as
Yes.
appropriate?
Yep.
Excellent, great. So as Peter said, I'm Dylan Sussman, senior planner here at Dodson and Flinker. I'm very happy to be with you all tonight. So we've gotten through the welcome and introductions. I have a presentation that I'm hoping will be 35 minutes. There are a lot of slides. It might take a little longer. So there's a lot of ground to cover here to introduce you to the project, the MBTA Communities Law and Guidelines, some information about housing and demographics in West Newbury.
Salisbury.
If you could mute yourself, please, iPhone 483, that would be great, as well as everybody else. Talk about some analysis we've done of potential locations for multifamily districts, and then quickly look at some examples of multifamily housing. So after we get through all of that, then we're going to have a brief Q&A. We're going to be looking for just sort of clarifying questions and technical questions, and for keep that as brief as possible so that you guys have as much time as possible to talk in small groups. We find that the more time you have in small groups, literally the more time everybody gets to speak. If everybody speaks in that Q&A portion, there just isn't as much time for people to talk. And then after the small group discussions, we'll have a report out and wrap it up. So our approach to this project is basically, as you can see, this at the center of it is community engagement. So every step along the way, we want to check in with planning board and with the community at large and make sure we're on the right track. So we're sort of at this 3-4A, that's from our scope, those numbers. So analyzing the town and identifying potential districts. And here we are checking in with you. And then after that, we're going to visualize some alternatives and develop zoning districts, check in again, draft some zoning, check in again, and then hopefully the town will adopt the zoning. So the process sort of visually looks like this. So tonight we're looking at existing conditions analysis and thinking about potential locations for districts very roughly. Next week, there's a design workshop where we're going to do this sort of public visioning and thinking about design of potentially specific locations and what multifamily housing should look like and what kind of characteristics the zoning should have. That will result in some concept plans for specific district locations. Peter's going to draw up some ideas of what multifamily housing could look like on those sites in plan view, and we'll refine those. And then the zoning actually comes after all of that. That's when we start to develop the zoning, when we know what it is that the community wants. So our approach to zoning is based in physical planning and getting clear what the community wants before the zoning gets written. In terms of the project timeline, we started in late April. So far, we've done some site tours, some background interviews. We've looked at past plans and data, done some GIS analysis. We're here on June 20th at the first public forum. Like I said, there's another one next week, and we'd love for you to come to that one as well. It'll be fun and fast-paced and interesting and in person. And there might be food. So those are all good reasons to come. Over the summer, we're going to be developing the sort of regulatory options, and then into the fall, we'll be drafting and revising the zoning with the goal of bringing it to public hearing, the public meeting, the town meeting in the spring. So I'm going to walk through Section 3A of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, otherwise known as the Zoning Act, and then the compliance guidelines that go along with that. So I apologize if this section is a little technical and maybe even boring, but it's important to know what you're being required to do so that we can all be on the same page in terms of what you want within the confines of what the state is requiring. So the Section 3A is otherwise known as the MBTA Communities Law. It's a change to the state law that enables zoning, which is Chapter 40A. So it sets out, it's pretty brief, it's just a couple paragraphs. And then there are these compliance guidelines, which are the regulations that say how those few paragraphs should be interpreted. Those were developed by Department of Housing and Community Development, which is now confusingly known as Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, or EOHLC. That's like within the last couple of weeks, it has a new name. So I'm going to try to use the new name in this presentation. It applies to 177 communities. West Newbury is designated as an adjacent small town. So probably some of you are wondering why something that's about the MBTA applies to West Newbury when you don't have an MBTA station. It's because you're an adjacent small town. And so for the purpose of this, like, you know, it's pretty easy to get from your town to the MBTA station. And so you're considered within the service area for the MBTA, and therefore an appropriate place for multifamily housing in the view of the people who wrote the law. So the law requires that every community within every one of those 177 communities have at least one zoning district that allows multifamily by right. It defines multifamily housing as a building with 3 or more residential dwellings, or a lot with 2 or more buildings, each of which has more than one residential dwelling in each building. So it's 3 or more units on a single lot in a single building, or a lot with basically 4 or more units in 2 or more buildings. The law requires that the minimum gross density for multifamily housing that's allowed by right is 15 units per acre. So that's what the zoning has to allow. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's feasible to build on a site, especially in a community like West Newbury, which has soils which are significantly constraining to septic systems and no public wastewater system. So like I said, it has to be allowed by right, but it can be subject to site plan review. So that's a process that the town already has built into its zoning, that the planning board is well versed in site plan review. It sets out requirements for what development could look like, how traffic flow works on a site, and so forth. So you still have control over sort of the layout of a development, but the actual use has to be allowed by right. The zoning can be a base district or it could be an overlay district. So in West Newbury, the law requires that every one of these MBTA communities have a multifamily unit capacity equal to 5% of the total number of housing units. So for West Newbury, 5% of your 1,740 housing units is 87 multifamily units. So that's what you're being required to zone for, is 87 multifamily units. If those are done at the minimum density that's required of 15 units per acre, it comes out to about 6 acres zoned for multifamily housing. If you allowed greater density, it would be less land area. And then there's a little bit of an additional wrinkle I'll talk about later, which is this idea of developable land. There's no minimum district size for West Newbury other than that capacity that I just mentioned of the 87 units. You got to be able to fit those on to the district. You could have multiple districts. Half of the multifamily zoning district must be contiguous lots of land. If the multifamily, if you can do this with less than 5 acres, right? So say you zoned at 87 units an acre, then you could do it with 1 acre, and all of the lots in the district must be contiguous. So if you can do it in less than 5 acres, all the lots in the district must be contiguous. You can have sub-districts with different allowed densities. So you could say that one part of the district has a density lower than 15 units per acre, and another part has a density greater than 15 units per acre, as long as overall it averages out to 15 units per acre across all the sub-districts. The compliance guidelines say that where there isn't a transit station, so in your case, the communities are encouraged to locate the multifamily zoning district in an area with reasonable access to a transit station, near an existing downtown or village center, near a regional transit authority bus stop or line, or in a location with existing underutilized facilities that can be redeveloped into new multifamily housing. So those are their, I guess, recommendations of where it is. It's not a binding requirement. It's an encouraging thing. Within the zoning district, there's this concept of developable land. So the town will only get credit for land that's actually developable. You can't like zone a pond and say, here's our district, because it's not actually developable and the state won't count that. You can't zone wetlands and say that's where our housing should be. The state won't count that. So developable land is all privately owned land, except for lots or portion of lots that meet the definition of excluded land, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. And then developable public land. So not all public land is considered developable. It has to meet one of these criteria. It has to be used by a local housing authority, or it has to have been identified in your housing production plan, or it has to have been designated for disposition and redevelopment, or other public lands at the state's discretion. So you can lobby for other public land if you can make a significant, strong case, and maybe they'll go along with it. Excluded land includes hydrologic features, so water stuff, protected, restricted open space, wellhead protection areas, Title V setbacks, and surface water protection zone A, rights of way, and most public land. That's shown on this map. So here you are, here's West Newbury, and all this stuff in green and blue is excluded land. You'll notice that a lot of this is public and institutional land. So some of that may actually qualify. This is the data from the state's compliance tool. It may need some tweaking because, for example, one of these sites was designated in the housing production plan. Okay, that's excluded land. So again, the areas that are shown in white are the potential ones for that do count if you adopt zoning for them. Then there's this idea of sensitive land, which is areas that the state is suggesting it might be wise to avoid. So those are things like flood areas that flood a lot, special flood hazard areas, active farmland with prime farm soils, priority habitat of rare species, wellhead protection areas, surface water protection zones. So those are shown in this map, and you can see that basically almost the entirety of the sort of south portion of West Newbury falls into that category, as well as some of the land north of Main Street along the river and farmland and so forth. When you combine the sensitive and excluded land together, you get a pattern that looks like this. So again, you're seeing a lot of big blocks that are open space or town-owned land, these fingers of wetlands and waterways, as well as rare species habitat and so forth. So again, the pattern that jumps out to me is that this kind of south portion of West Newbury is probably less suitable. That also coincides with areas that don't have public water supply in West Newbury. So that's a sensible and convenient overlap that's sort of pushing again towards toward the area to the north being more suitable. I want to offer a reminder. This is about changing zoning. So what the law requires you to do is to change your zoning. It does not require the town to build housing units. It doesn't require the town to provide infrastructure that makes projects feasible. And the projects still have to comply with Wetland Protections Act and Title V septic requirements. And so, as I said before, it's probably pretty likely in West Newbury that if anything gets built resulting from zoning changes, the actual density will be less than 15 units per acre. because your soils are fairly restrictive in many places for septic systems. Okay, now I'm going to talk about affordability requirements. So this zoning change is intended to produce multifamily housing. It's not necessarily intended to produce affordable housing. So there's no requirement from the state that your zoning changes require affordable housing. I think the idea here is to produce more housing, to produce more diverse housing, so that there are more places for people to live. And affordable housing is taken care of by other state laws. However, the town may require up to 10% of the units to be affordable, or households whose income is less than 80% of the area median income. In West Newbury, 80% of the area median income for a one-person household is $66,300 a year. For a four-person household, it's $94,650 per year, and so forth. So that's the kind of target AMI if you want to adopt affordable housing requirements. West Newbury zoning already does this. It already requires 10% of units be affordable for projects with 3 or more units. So you might need to make some tweaks to it, to the language, but otherwise that's kind of can continue as is. If the town wanted to require a greater percentage of units or deeper affordability requirements, then you could adopt what's called a 40R smart growth district, and up to 20% of the units could be required to be affordable. So some options there, but again, this is mostly about market rate multifamily housing and not necessarily affordable housing, with some flexibility for the town to require affordable housing. In terms of age restrictions, you are not allowed to have age restrictions with this zoning, and you're not allowed to do things that would sort of by default results in age restrictions. So you can't make units not suitable for families with children by limiting the number of units or bedrooms or the maximum number of occupants. You are allowed to allow mixed use, but you can't require it. So mixed use is when there's commercial use and housing in the same building, very traditional downtown or village center building type. So you can allow that, but you can't require it. The idea there is, I assume that in many places, the commercial portion of development is not as viable as the housing. And so the goal here is to get housing. And I don't think the state wants a commercial requirement to be dragging down the feasibility of housing production. So what happens if you don't comply with the state law? So there's a loss, so you would lose eligibility for state grants. So the Housing Choice Initiative, which funds a lot of sort of planning grants, the local capital projects fund, and then MassWorks, which is one of the state's major infrastructure grant programs. I guess I could say it is the state's major infrastructure grant program. The Attorney General also put out an advisory in March that clarified that this is a state law. It's not like you can just opt to not comply with a state law. And so if you don't, there may be civil enforcement action. And there's also potentially liability under federal and state fair housing laws. So those are things to consider if the town is considering not complying. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to housing and demographics in West Newbury. So sort of general population trends, West Newbury has grown less than the state overall, even though you're in Essex County, which has grown faster than the state overall. So you've grown at 8.46% between 2000 and 2021, whereas Essex County grew at 11.22%. The Donahue Institute at UMass produces population projections for the state of Massachusetts. Their most recent projections just came out a couple weeks ago or a month ago. And they project that between 2020 and 2050, West Newbury's population is going to decrease by about 35%. Even as Essex County as a whole increases in population. So you can see that only a few communities are increasing in population. Basically, Haverhill is increasing in population, and Haverhill is big enough that the county overall will likely grow. So decreasing 35% is a big number. It's hard to wrap your mind around. What I can say is that this is partially based on the age pyramid in the community. So you have a decent number of sort of young people below 20, and you have a pretty hefty portion of the population that's, 59 and above, but you have a very small cohort of people between the age of 20 and 40, so 15% of your population versus 28 for the state of Massachusetts. And that's the group that produces children. And sort of naturally increases the size of the population. So what I think they're projecting is that your household sizes will continue to shrink. And so you may have the same number of households, they'll be smaller, and therefore your population shrinks. So, that has potentially big implications for what a community is, or who's available to volunteer, for how many people are paying taxes, for school enrollment, and just generally what it's like to be in a community. So despite the slower population growth in West Newbury, the number of households has actually increased faster than Essex County. So 14% versus about 12% change in households between 2000 and 2021. You have a very high percentage of home ownership. I'm sure that's not a surprise to any of you. About 92% of housing units are owner occupied, and about 94% of those housing units are detached single family houses. So you have a very, very low percentage of attached single family houses or townhouses or multifamily housing. As is the case across Massachusetts and much of the country, housing prices have increased quite a lot. So you have the sort of third highest median home value index, according to Zillow, behind Boxford and Andover. Housing prices increased pretty sharply during the pandemic, and they seem to have leveled off since. But they're, $700,000-ish. So pretty expensive and challenging for people at the middle and lower end of the income spectrum. The housing costs, so for housing units with a mortgage, the median selected monthly owner cost is about $3,000.
We hire a ton of youth, yeah.
Please mute yourself.
So we did the Laura.
But
Okay. Sorry if I muted you. I apologize if that offended you. Okay, so for housing units without a mortgage, the monthly owner cost is about $1,100, $1,200. And then for renters, the median gross rent is about $2,250 a month. We looked at your housing production plan from 2018. As I said, that's being updated currently. So it set a goal of meeting the 10% subsidized housing inventory by 2020. To do that, the town would have needed to add about 26 affordable units per year over 5 years. That has not happened. Other key policy strategies were to amend the business district zone to allow for more housing, to allow 3-family developments by right, if at least one unit is deed restricted affordable. So those 3-family developments would fit within the criteria for multifamily housing for the MBTA communities law. The deed restricted affordable thing of 1 per 3 is way beyond what would be allowed. Allowing accessory dwelling units or family compounds and establishing an affordable housing trust. So of that, the town's had a 43, currently has 43 affordable units, and there was a net increase of 4 units since 2018. You're 113 affordable units short of meeting the 10% threshold, which is the threshold for reduced vulnerability to a 40B development. The town has prepared draft zoning amendments to allow accessory dwelling units by special permit. Zoning for 3-family units and housing in the business district hasn't changed. The town did establish an affordable housing trust, and you're in the process of creating an affordable a new housing production plan. So that's the rundown of demographics and sort of key housing policy. Now I'm going to talk about potential locations for multifamily districts. So we did some GIS analysis. This is like very broad scale mapping based on available data mostly from the state of Massachusetts. And what we did is we looked at different constraints on development to try to identify locations that are relatively unconstrained, the ones that might be more possible to develop in the future. So we started by looking at physical constraints to development. So you'll notice that some of this overlaps with the excluded land and sensitive land that I was talking about earlier, which is the state's way of doing this, but we ran our own analysis to make sure that we were catching all the things that we typically look for. So in terms of physical constraints to development, that includes ponds and streams and rivers, slopes that are greater than 20%, hydric soils, which are basically wet soils, floodplains, and then some other sort of mucky wet soils like Ipswich and Scarborough. So the areas shown in white are the areas that are not physically constrained, and all the colored stuff is the physically constrained area. So if you zoom in on just one portion of West Newbury, you can see the pattern a little bit better. You can see sort of along Main Street near the intersection of 113. So there's some wetlands in the back of properties. There's some steep slopes that would make getting into some properties difficult. Floodplains along the river, and so forth. Hydric soils over here by Bridge Street. So those are physical constraints to development. Then looking at regulatory constraints. So these are other regulations that, besides zoning, that get difficult to build on property. So down in the southern portion of your town, there's a large area that's indicated as potentially having prime rare species habitat, prime and estimated rare species habitat. So this is the constraint because if you want to develop in these areas, you need to do extra legwork. So it can be time consuming and expensive. It's not like a hard no, but it's another barrier. The riverfront area, 200-foot riverfront area and wetland buffers are regulatory constraints, as are protected open space, which you have a fair amount of. So again, zooming in on that same portion of town, you can see, we've added the wetland buffers, the riverfront areas, the protected open space. And again, there's sort of a pattern of some developable land along Main Street and in the backs of some of these parcels. Then the next step is we looked at parcels that are unlikely to be developed because of their current use or their lot size. So Mass Highway land that's owned by conservation organizations, some of the public or the municipal lands, residential condominiums where it's pretty unlikely that you're going to get all the owners to agree to additional development, or they may just pretty much be built out to the capacity of the land already, and electric transmission right of way up here in the north of the town. And then we looked at small parcels. So parcels under an acre are shown in red here. There are a lot of them along Main Street in the sort of more historic portions of your town before zoning was adopted and the lot sizes were required to get bigger. So, we're guessing that lots smaller than an acre are not going to have septic capacity for 3 or 4 units, or just are not going to be very viable and compelling to redevelop. So we're calling those unlikely to be developed. Then lots in the sort of 1 to 5 acre zone, 1 to 5 acre range seem like, probably not going to get developed, but possibly could if there's a really motivated property owner and pretty good soils. So those are in pink and they're in our kind of maybe zone. And then the parcels that remain shown in white are not constrained by their use, and they're more than 5 acres. So those seem like the ones that probably have more potential. But again, they only have potential if the owner wants to redevelop them, if the town adopts the zoning changes, and if there don't prove to be more wetlands or other physical constraints or soil that are not suitable for wastewater disposal. So here's the pattern there. You can see along Main Street that many of these properties are less than an acre. The remainder are less than 5 acres for the most part, although there are some larger parcels that are larger than 5 acres. Putting all that together, you get this map. So the gray in this map is all of those physical constraints, regulatory constraints, and parcels that are unlikely to be developed. And what shows in the sort of brown yellow and the bright yellow are the remaining areas where the parcels are either between 1 to 5 acres in the brown yellow or greater than 5 acres in the bright yellow. So some of these parcels, may have constraints on them that were not picked up in the GIS data. And some of those we're aware of. So some of them, may have a conservation restriction that hasn't been fully recorded yet, or others of them, like the Mullen property here, shows up as gray because it's town-owned land, and so presumed to be excluded land, but it's not really because it was mentioned in your housing production plan. But overall, I think you can see there is adequate land to find an area where you could, zone for 87 units at 15 units per acre. And so the real question for tonight is, which of these places make sense to change the zoning? So zooming in, you can see some of the larger areas. So for example, these parcels over here, I believe currently in the process of being built. It's a more recent subdivision, if I'm correct. This is the Dublin greenhouse property, potential contender for a district, and so forth. Okay, so where does housing belong? We've looked at all the where does housing not belong? But the question for you all tonight is where does housing belong? And so I think there are a couple of, going back to that, MBTA communities are encouraged to put housing where there's sort of convenient access to a transit station, where there's an existing village center, where there's land that could be redeveloped. Some things that I think that might make sense to consider is proximity to schools, proximities to the library, proximity to open space and trail, the existing transportation network. So Main Street, is providing convenient access through the town as a state designed for more transportation. And then the other factor to consider is water service. So it's a lot easier and more feasible to develop in an area that has water service than an area that doesn't. And generally, it's the sort of southeast portion of your town that doesn't currently have water service. So multiple factors, I think, sort of pointing towards the north portion of your town being more viable or more reasonable location to adopt multifamily zoning, and probably particularly along Main Street. But that's up for you to discuss when we get to the discussion portion of the meeting. So the 2018 Housing Production Plan called out some potential locations for housing development. So the Dunn property, which is that greenhouse property I was mentioning earlier, the Mullen property, which is a town-owned property that's previously been looked at for housing development, are ones that still seem like they might make sense. Some of the other ones they called out no longer make sense because they've been developed or other things have happened. The map in 2018 also called out a village center development area, which was not necessarily stated to be a housing opportunity site, but was on the map. And I left it on because it's shown up in several previous planning documents for the town. So the town seems to historically have had an interest in sort of having a more vibrant village center, or at least enabling the existing village center to continue to be. So overlaying those potential sites on our gray and gold map, you can see that Dunn property is pretty much mostly in the golds. The village center development area is largely constrained, mostly due to lot size. The Mullen property shows as gray, but is actually probably viable. At least parts of it. It has a lot of wetlands on it too. Then there are some other sites that seem like they might be worth considering. These have been looked at previously. This is not an exhaustive list, it's just some things to start a conversation. So there's the Knapp greenhouse property, which has some potentially developable land in the front and more constrained land in the back. There's the Dunn Fields, which is town-owned land. Has a lot of competing interests for that site. But it's possible that some portion of it could be used for multifamily housing. If you wanted that to be compliant with the state law, you would have to take additional steps, either going through a process of disposition or convincing the state that it's a really viable site. And then there's All Saints Church, which has declining in attendance and is considering housing. Okay, now we've added those excluded and sensitive lands to the map. And so you can see that for the Dunn property, pretty much it's all still viable. The Knapp didn't add any more excluded land. Mullen shows it's excluded and shouldn't be. Dunn is excluded, and there's a small portion of All Saints Church up by the road that has potential under the state's compliance requirements. So I wanted to zoom in on the Mullen property because there was a plan developed for it in 2009. So this is a 34.2 acre site with 11 acres of wetlands. And I think what's valuable to think about with a Mullen site is what the proposed density was. And my understanding, somebody may tell me I'm wrong later, but my understanding is that this density was basically what was viable based on the septic requirements. So 34 acres of site, they were proposing 40 units with a proposed density of 1.16 units per acre. And this is similar to the density that you've seen in recent development projects like Drake's Landing, one-ish units per acre. May be an indication of what's actually viable to build in West Newbury. So while you have to zone for 15 units per acre, what results may be less than that. So just wanted to throw that out there. Okay. Finally, I'm going to close with, what does multifamily housing look like? Well, I think the answer is it looks like a lot of different things, right? So on the top here, you've got an adaptive reuse of an existing single family house. It's on 4 units on a really small site. So you get 17 units per acre. There are a lot of half-acre sites in the center of West Newbury. Septic constraints notwithstanding. If you redeveloped, if you added units to some of those, you could potentially hit 15 units per acre. This other site is in Situate, where they added additional buildings to the rear of a historic site or of an existing building. So added 30 units and 3 commercial spaces on 1.5 acres, and you end up with 21 units per acre. The one on the top is affordable housing in Brookline, Mass. 24 units on 1.1 acres, 22 units per acre. Down on the bottom, you've got new construction in Hyannis. There's 5 new buildings on 1.5 acres for 30 units per acre. So you're seeing these numbers are getting bigger and exceeding. This one's doubling what's required for you all. Here in Newburyport, some historic townhouses. There are 11 units on a 0.18 acre site for 60 units per acre. And then on the bottom, in addition to a historic building in Northampton, 31 units here on a 0.5 acre site, so 62 units per acre. These are examples of new multifamily, again, in Northampton, where our office is, so we're familiar with it. Maybe it could fit in West Newbury. It's up to you guys to decide what fits and what doesn't. And then finally, these are some examples of mixed use projects. So Manchester by the Sea on the top, Acton, West Acton Center on the bottom, and a project in Niantic on the right. So these are all projects that mix commercial space and residential space. So there's just a flavor of what multifamily housing could look like. So now is your chance to ask questions. And again, I'm looking for clarifying questions and technical questions. If you have opinions, I'd really love for you to hold your opinions and comments to the groups so that you have more time to talk and everybody else does too. So any questions? Anne?
Just a point of clarification, the examples you just showed, were any of those in towns with septic?
That's a good question. So probably not.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're trying to show you examples that meet the requirement of 15 units per acre, while also recognizing that, as I've said, you may not be building 15 units per acre in West Newbury.
So I have a question. Where does you're showing different homes and land, but where does the land come from? I mean, I know that sounds really crazy, but is it just personal homeowners that decide that they're going to comply and sell to the town for the ADU for this?
Yeah, so this is about,
I'm trying to figure this out. I did read through it, and I've lived here for 3.5 decades, but it's a different concept, because you're not affordable housing, right? And you're not,
right.
You're something else that I don't even know what to say.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to understand, and I don't know of any buses here yet. That was the other thing. So it's really confusing for a person that's not been involved in all of this for a while,
I missed the last thing you said. You don't have any something here?
No, I'm just trying to figure out, all right, let me just back up. First
No,
question.
I understood the first part of your comment. There was just
Where
one
does the
word I
land
didn't
come
hear.
from? Is it individual
Yeah.
people that just sell the red lots or the green lots or the pizza factory lot or the, Dunn lot or the whatever? I mean, is
Yeah, I
that
gotcha.
That's what I was trying to figure out.
Sure.
And I read through the bright, I almost threw it in the garbage can, but I did read it. And it's confusing for the average citizen that's not part of the group here. You know what I'm saying? I think overall,
Sure.
just to say, and I really appreciate your presentation because it was excellent, but for the layman person who doesn't understand,
Yep.
like, where does the land come from? You
Yep.
know, and I
So
totally
let
get,
me answer you, Karen.
what's that?
Let me answer you.
Mhm.
Okay, so this project is about zoning changes. So
Yep.
zoning is the basic land use law that controls what can be built on land in West Newbury by
Right,
private individuals.
right.
And what the dimensional requirements of that are and other design requirements of that are.
I
So
got you.
it's all about private development. West
Yes.
Newbury has a history of trying to take on sort of public efforts at building affordable or mixed income projects.
Yes.
That is not what this is about. This is
Okay.
about changing the zoning to enable private property owners or developers to build multifamily housing if they so choose.
Gotcha.
So the idea is to change the law to enable that. Right now, it's not allowed, except in limited circumstances in West Newbury. So the idea is to change the law so that it's possible to build multifamily housing, just like it's possible to currently build single-family housing.
Understood.
And so, like I said, it's not really about affordable housing, although
Yes.
the town can choose to require some limited amount of affordable housing, 10%. It's really about making it possible to build multifamily housing, sort of somewhat, I wouldn't say evening the playing field because we're only talking about a small portion of the town, but somewhat balancing the bias that's in your zoning currently towards single family housing, which
Yeah.
is, you know,
So it's a law that's making us change it's a law that's making us reevaluate the way that we live here and have zoning. I get it.
yeah,
So I understand. It's just the way it goes. But I'm not against this. Don't get me wrong. I'm trying to understand because it's very different than what I've ever read before.
okay, yeah.
And
Yes.
it's very different. And I think the average citizen here that's been here a long time doesn't understand it, you know, but that's just me. That's my
Yeah.
opinion. I could be wrong, but I don't know if I am or not. But
I mean, I think you're right that it's confusing if you're a town who's doesn't have multifamily currently.
yes,
And is used to taking on. The town has been sort of very activist in preserving land and also been, you know, had made some efforts toward trying to make housing projects happen.
yes.
And this is a different mindset, which is enabling private development. So
I think Patricia had her hand up first.
great. Patricia?
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so I was going to ask the same question Anne asked, which was those examples that you showed us in other towns were probably towns that had public sewer. But my understanding of what you said early on in the presentation was that whether or not we have adequate water or sewer is not determinative of whether or not the district complies. Is my understanding right?
That's exactly correct. You said it very well.
Okay.
I would have a question too.
Great. Why don't you go next?
Yes, I want to follow on what Patricia said. My name is Jean Lambert. I too understand that water and sewer are not issues are not determinative ones. However, I was part of our master plan that we did a number of years ago, and the gating factor then and still is now is water. How can you force something like this on a town that doesn't have the adequate water? That it's just procrustean.
You're talking about drinking water supply?
No, I'm talking about all kinds of water. And would overbuilding like this get in the way of those of us who are on wells and compromise our wells?
Yeah, so the town is doing a drinking water, is doing a drinking water study, and so we'll have more information about that.
It's not just drinking water, it's everything water. Everything water, because there's a water table. And if
Okay,
you draw
potable
from
water.
that, then, the rest of us, in other words, are we going to, in the interest of building more housing, and I'm all for extending housing, but it has to be done very carefully, because if we do it willy-nilly or in this Procrustean fashion, the rest, other residents suffer in terms of water and other ways of life that are important to them.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Kathleen?
Hi, great presentation. My quick question was, would these units be rental units or would they be sold as condos or would it be mixed?
That would be up to whoever does the building, what they choose to do. They could be either home ownership or rental.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I just wanted to address something, because of what Karen said. There's really two ways, I think, of thinking about this. One is if we zone land that's owned by the town currently and doesn't have any houses on it, and then there'd have to be a way for a developer to come in and build on that. That might be, for example, the Mullen property. The other thing that I think is going to be more concerning to people is if we have a district and there are people that have homes within the new district. And how this would work, Karen, is that if a developer were to look at a private lot or maybe a couple of private lots that were close together, the developer might then approach the private owners and say, look, I'll give you this much money to buy your house and your lot. And if the developer put together a couple lots like that, might come up with some sort of land that they could then develop. So it sort of enables a developer to look at some of our current properties in town and then decide whether or not they would find it profitable to buy the land and develop it at a higher density. So it's still all free market kind of stuff going on. It could have an influence on property values, and it would definitely change densities. And it's not like we've got a choice in this. And when it comes to Jean's concerned about water, that's a completely valid concern. But I think that I think most developments along these lines would have to have access to the town water supply. And then there's always an analysis of capabilities, fire flows, and the sorts of impacts there. And everybody in town knows that our town water supply is kind of on the edge as it is. So it's not like we got a choice in these things. The state is imposing this upon us and we're trying to find the best way to do it.
I know, Professor Ray, sorry, my camera isn't working, but I did read that. And I totally get where we are. I've been living here for 37 years. It's just a different concept. And I just think it's a little bit more than a lot of people can understand. That's all. You know what I mean? I mean, there's water, there's land, there's where it's going to go. It's not like it's going to detract from our home values because somebody's going to build on it anyway. I get that, but it's a different way of thinking, right?
It is, and
this is not why we all came here either, which I don't want to bring that up because I'm not that old, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Just
You and I have been in.
have to say it is a different concept and it's being shoved down our throats basically.
Yeah.
And that's basically the thing that it's so un-American.
Yeah, well, we've been in town about the same amount of time, you and I, and yeah, it's a different concept. We have to put the zoning in, establish these zoning areas. Whether or not somebody actually takes advantage of the new zoning, we can't say. And the more complicated it is to supply water to deal with the
Yes.
sewerage and whatnot, the
Right.
more expensive it becomes for a developer to do this. So, yeah.
Pay your water
it's
bill in
tough.
West Newbury, you'll shake, your hands shake. Your hands shake
All right.
with the taxes, your hands shake, it's a different.
Yep.
It's,
I'm going to take one more question from
Yeah,
Nathan.
I have a
Kelly.
follow-up to Ray's. Ray had mentioned Jean Lambert again.
So if this is sort of, we're trying to limit this to questions and technical clarifications so that you guys have time to talk.
This is a clarification.
Okay.
Yeah. Why in the world do we have to do this at all just because the state says so? The Boston Globe published an article that I shared with the planning board. Marlborough, for one, is not buying it because there's a town that has many attributes similar to ours. It does not work for them. So why can't the small towns that don't have the public transportation, that don't have the services such as ours, where this is completely ludicrous to do, just band together and sue the state or ask for an accommodation for the town? Because one size does not fit all, and that's what they're trying to do.
All right. Nathan Kelly, do you have a question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. So I'd like a clarification. I took a lot of notes, but some things got jumbled. Exactly what it takes to comply with the law. In the presentation, it said that multifamily must be 5%, and that was 87 units for West Newbury. But however, you went on to say that it's really about zoning and land use. So do we just need a certain number of acres that then is designated for potential multifamily? And then what is the timeline exactly for compliance? When do we have to do this by, please?
So the answer to your first question is yes, you just have to zone enough land to get 87 units at a minimum of 15 units per acre. So 15, enough developable land at 15 units per acre. So in the minimum, if you were able to find 5.8 acres of developable contiguous land that you were willing to adopt a zoning district for at 15 units per acre, you would meet your requirement. Timeline. The timeline, I'm trying to find the answer to that question. I think your timeline is like 2020. Your deadline to submit is December 31st of 2025. So that's the deadline.
Can I ask a question? I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I can.
I'm not sure how to raise my hand using this, but
You're fine.
I just was curious, is this a situation where we have to comply with the state, otherwise we lose state money? Or that's not even a part of it, we just have to comply no matter what? Thank you.
I guess it depends on who you're asking. If you ask the Attorney General, she says you have to comply no matter what. But there is also specific state money that's called out that you will not have access to. So that includes the Mass Works grant program and the Housing Choice Initiative grant program. So you will lose access to grant programs. And then there are a number of other grant programs that you'll lose points on. So you'll be less likely to get them. So I guess there's a couple ways of looking at it. One is it's the law, you have to do it. Another is you're going to lose some money, potentially. And then third way of looking at it is just, I guess, the policy question of, is it right to allow multifamily by right? Is it the right thing to do? And that's for you all to decide. So one thing that I'd like people to think about and to talk about tonight in the breakout groups that we're about to go to is, is it possible to think about this in a way that it could actually be like acceptable or even beneficial for the town to allow multifamily? Like what could make this good for West Newbury, if that's possible? So I'm gonna do a little fiddling here to open some breakout groups. And
May I just ask one more thing before we go into groups? And this is a clarification, not an opinion. why in a town like ours with land do we have to go by the density requirement? In some towns that would work beautifully, but why, if it works better for our particular town to do it in a more spread out fashion, why do we have to go with this 15 units per acre?
I think that the 15 units an acre comes from, there's basically 2 paragraphs. That's the state law that was passed. And then there's 50 pages of guidance that was developed afterwards. And so what the state regulators are going to be doing is looking to see if each town has legitimately zoned enough land to produce their share according to the total numbers, the build out. So I think the more important number is the 87 units or whatever it is, the state considers to be West Newbury's share of multifamily housing in the region. Formally, you will be zoning lands for 15 units an acre, but because of the constraints, as Dylan said, that's probably never going to be built. You're not going to have that big apartment building looming over a site necessarily. It's probably going to be spread out a little bit more. And one of the things we want to talk about tonight and especially next week is, how to fit housing into the landscape of West Newbury in a way that respects the traditions of the town. And as you saw in some of the examples that Dylan showed, many towns in the region have very large houses right now. So if somebody's building a 7,000 square foot house, does that make a smaller impact on the landscape than a 5,000 or 7,000 square foot house that actually has 5 or 7 units in it? And how can you fit on the landscape? So there's been a lot of examples, and we're going to get into this more next week, of towns that have promoted, multifamily development that looks like an extended farmhouse, that looks like a wonderful country estate, that looks like a beautiful village that you'd want to live in. So one of the things we want to talk about is how do we shape this development so that it's actually a place that all of us would like to live, that you'd like to live, and not something that you just cringe and say, oh, that's something we had to do. Because it is possible to get to 15 units an acre and have a really beautiful project. And one of the questions for tonight is, which sites in the town are the best places to test out those different ideas? So if we're going to look at some of them, do we look at the ones that have been talked about in the past? Are there other opportunities that you might recommend? Some of those might be larger. Some of them could be quite small. Some of them might, take advantage of what we call infill development, where you have a row of existing beautiful houses, and then next to them or behind them is an empty lot that doesn't have another use. Are those appropriate for a small infill project? So that's kind of thing we want to start talking about tonight and then get into in more detail. So as I said earlier, it's kind of an experiment, right? We're not taking this as a given, but we're really looking at, is it possible to do something that could benefit the town and accommodate those 87 units potentially? And then actually our goal is to go to town meeting and have everybody say, yeah, this would be really great. I need a place to live. My kids need a place to live. But of course, it's up to you to make those decisions. So what you're really going to help us with tonight and next week is really, as you have been doing, raising the questions that people in the town at large are going to want to know. And if we can convince you, hopefully we can convince everybody else. Dylan, how are we doing?
Good.
Can I ask you a question? Just one question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the 2025 deadline was the deadline for designating the land, right?
Correct.
Okay. So what happens after that if no private developer is interested, is not interested for 5 or 6 years, and the land sits there and nothing happens in terms of building these units?
You fulfilled your requirements. That's what happens. Nothing happens. So it's about zoning. Zoning is about long-term land use planning. It's not about making things happen necessarily. It's about long-term land use planning. So the state is well aware that nothing may get built for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. But you will have fulfilled your requirement to make it possible for something to get built. if it's feasible to do so and somebody wants to.
Yeah, and this is about big regional policies, right? So the idea is if every town in the MBTA orbit zones some land for multifamily housing, that 10 and 20 years from now, we'll have a lot more housing than we would have otherwise. So the whole thing is kind of an experiment, but there's such demand that, particularly towns that are closer to the MBTA stations, there are people ready to go. There are people ready to build this housing. Whether it ever happens in West Newbury, we don't know.
The unfortunate situation is the cost of living for.
Karen, I'm going to cut you off because we really want to give time for the breakout groups, and we've heard from you a couple times already. So you feel free to speak in your group, and I'm going to open up the breakout groups now. So you all are going to get whisked away to a small group with a facilitator who's going to ask you some questions. And I hope you have good conversations, and we'll be back together, I would say, in about 40 minutes. Some of you who will be in the group with Angus Jennings are going to wait just a minute for me to join. Oh, wait, got to move. Got to do one more tweak here. There are too many planning board members in one group here.
And Dylan, Dylan, this is Sue. I just want to say there was a question about will the breakout groups be recorded too? Because of tonight, we can only record one of those, just be technically that what we're able to do, but we'll report back and we'll provide notes for all of them. So one of them will get recorded and the rest of them will get reported back and recorded on the, or information will be posted on the website for those.
Thanks, Sue.
Thanks.
All right, I'm opening up the rooms now.
Welcome to group number 4. So we've already had a good conversation for the start of one. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in this, a lot of concern, which is to be expected. But as I said, we have a year and a half. You have a year and a half to figure out how to comply with this, and so we don't have to make the decisions right away. I'm going to ask if any of you are able, who don't have your cameras on, and turn your cameras on so that we can see you and talk to you. That would be great. Otherwise, first thing I want to do is just go around and ask each of you to introduce yourself and give us one word that describes West Newbury. It's kind of a little icebreaker. Rachel, would you mind starting?
Hi, I'm Rachel Person. I live on South Street. Oh gosh, quiet. I guess would be my word to describe West Newbury.
That's good. Tim.
Hi, Peter. It's Tim Cronin. I'm actually a member of the planning board, and
you're allowed to have opinions.
Yeah, and I would say my opinion is friendly. And there is one thing I want to say, Peter, that provides a little background to folks that is important, I think, in the context of what was described on the law, is that the small communities like West Newbury did get together and they affected that rulemaking substantially that you talked about. I don't know if this is worth bringing up later to the larger group, but as a result, the requirement for a town like West Newbury for the number of units that would have to be created in the new zoning area went from something like 500, it was 500 odd, to 87. So there was a recognition that rural communities like West Newbury are in a different position as far as the capacity to accommodate large-scale multi-family development. So that was, I think, a positive recognition by the state at the time, the DHCD, when they were putting together those rules that you referred to.
Yeah, there seemed to be a fair amount of adjustment as they went along. Sue, do you have a word for West Newbury?
It's new to me, so I live next door in Newburyport. I've been here, but I am going to. I'm going to pass. I mean, it's beautiful. It's It's wonderful. I'm happy to be here, but I'm gonna leave the adjectives to others.
That's all right. I just thought I'd put you on the spot.
Thanks.
Let's see, iPhone 483, I see on my screen. Do you have an actual name? Oh, you're muted, I'm sorry.
Kathy Swanson.
Do you have a word that describes West Newbury?
Family friendly, 2 words.
We'll accept that. Doug. I'm sorry, you're muted. You go.
I've only been here 3 years, so I moved during the middle of COVID, during the beginning, but I found it to be very friendly. And I'm right on Main Street. And I just, if I could take the time, the presentation was excellent. And if I could add my understanding of zoning, I mean, there's the 40B laws allow high density development on 5 acres or more for affordable housing, but it doesn't happen unless it's economically feasible for the builders and developers. So even if you zone this land appropriate, it may never become economically feasible.
Yeah, that's a good point. Nathan.
Hi, I'm Nathan Kelly. I live on Stewart Street. I've been in town for about 6 years. I was on the finance committee for 5 years. So I've been dealing with all this stuff for a while. And the one word I would use would be peaceful.
I'm ready to move there. Sounds pretty good. Karen.
Karen Holmes. I've been here a little over 30 years. I would say peaceful was my first word, but I'll say idyllic.
Dean?
You calling on me? Did
Yes.
you say?
Yes.
Yes, Jean Lambert. I'm a resident close to 40 years now and serving on the Open Space Committee for 30 plus years. Seems like forever. Active in other town ways too, like the master plan I referenced. And I live on River Road. I would say that West Newbury, the word I would use is green and wanting to remain so. The last 3 surveys, townwide surveys that we have done prior to our open space plans, which were required by the state to do every so many years, it has come back resoundingly that what people in this town prize among everything else is the so-called rural quality. And I know that because I did the survey questionnaire and analyzed all the surveys. So I can say that unequivocally.
Well,
so,
thank you. That's
please
a little bit
do
more
not
than
compromise
one.
our rural, yeah, please
It's a
do
little
not
bit more than one
compromise our
word.
rural quality. Oh, I'm full of words. I'm a writer also.
I'm getting that impression, and it's great. Lastly, Adam Stone, are you with us?
Adam is our recorder,
Oh, okay.
but he's welcome. I don't know where Adam lives, but
That's all right. So we have like a 2 hours worth of questions. So I think based on stuff that has already come up, I guess the main question is there a need for something other than single family housing in West Newbury? And if there's a need now, how has that changed over the past few years or in the 40 years since you've been to town? Or do you think there's never going to be a need for multifamily housing? And I guess just feel free to speak.
Well, I'm on the Affordable Housing Trust, and I do believe there's a need for some type of multifamily housing. Maybe not necessarily in the density that was put forth tonight, but we're severely lacking in affordable homes. And so I think this type of proposal certainly would help if we mandate a requirement that a number of units be dedicated to affordable housing. But again, I'm not so sure about the density portion of the proposal.
When you're speaking of density, it's just like 15 units on an acre, or is it the total number?
No, the 15 units on an
Mm-hmm.
acre. I just, with sewer and water, and it just seems, I don't know, a big task.
Other thoughts, Doug?
I mean, I've been involved in the development and construction trade for 40 some years, and we have a dramatic shortage of housing, period, in New England. And there is a way to do appropriate housing, be it multifamily, be it high density. And there's a lot of regulation and checks in place right now that, again, it all comes down to economics in the end. That, if you've got to do a septic and try to get 15 units on an acre, you've got a hybrid system and your own sewage treatment plant, and cost is going to determine whether you can get 15 units there and what their affordability is going to be. So I do believe there's a need for multifamily housing in every community. I do believe the regulation's appropriate, and I do believe we should comply with it. And it's going to be dictated by when it becomes affordable. And no matter what parcel you pick in town, whether it's got town water or whether it's going to be on private water, will dictate how many units they can get, as well as the soil conditions in the septic. And I don't see anywhere in the town where you get 15 units on an acre and still support it with septic on that. It's just not going to happen. But we do need to move forward and have an area zoned for it and let the economics dictate when and how it happens.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts on the need for affordable housing?
I'm just gonna chime in.
Or any housing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very. I mean, as a nation, we're at least 6 million units behind in new construction to meet needs for folks in this country. The millennial generation is larger than the baby boomer generation, and home ownership is just has become more unobtainable as the years have gone on. So anything that we can do to provide more housing to people is needed, in my opinion. And just because we adopt this doesn't mean that it will actually happen, because it has to be financially viable for whatever developer there is to make that happen. So just because we allow it doesn't mean that it will actually happen. So I just want to add that.
I've talked to a lot of people in small towns who say, we don't want more density. If we need housing as a region, let them put it somewhere else. Is there circumstances under which having multifamily housing could actually benefit West Newbury by having it close, having it in one of those areas on Main Street or elsewhere that has a mix of uses? That's appropriate. How do we decide whether that would be a good thing?
Do have multifamily housing in town now. We have 2 families as of right. So there's a start there. It's not anywhere near the density that we're referring to here, but as folks have really understood, I think what's happening here is that this is talking about creating zoning districts that have this capacity to build these homes. And there's no guarantee that they will or could ever be built in the kind of numbers that we're talking about. But I think it's being on the planning board, it's our responsibility to try and figure out how to do this properly and take everyone's interests into account. And so some of that is just a recognition that that the sticker shock in West Newbury is significant. And I think that if we are going to try and enable seniors, senior citizens to remain in town, or young people to be able to come to town, we're going to need to have at least some areas with some higher density where there might be some smaller homes, but none of these are affordable I should say, in the context of like the affordable housing program that the state has, so I just want to distinguish that they're two different programs. West Newbury, we have an overlay district that encourages the construction of higher density homes. And so it resulted in these cottage developments, which I know have not been ideal because they ended up being a lot more pricier than I think people anticipated. But, if a developer comes in and offers higher density and, is able to construct on a site, then what you end up with, hopefully, with some homes that have a lower price, than some of the homes that are just up the road. So by the sheer number of addition of some units, so maybe it's up to 87 in this case, we're hoping to create some more variability in the homes in town rather than just, all large single family homes on big lots. And, there is some potential that we see to do that. And it is a very sensitive topic though, but I understand where it goes, and the feasibility is, as people have correctly assessed, totally a different story. You have to look at it parcel by parcel, and it really varies a lot.
The thing though is if you were to do some type of multifamily unit or smaller homes, I mean, you're gonna, as you said, our population is expected to decrease by 35%, and we need young people to help support this town and our tax base and our schools. And right now, we don't have enough homes for teachers to live here that that might teach in the area, for public servants, to be able to afford to live here. For our kids, I have kids in their 30s, and they can't. This is a difficult place for them, to buy a home. So it's not, when we say, I know we're talking about two different things: affordability and then the MBTA project. But either way, if you saw the numbers for an 80% of the median income, I mean, that's still a pretty decent income, and people can't afford, to buy a home here. So it would create, I think, that the ability for younger people to move here, and hopefully it would also create a little more diversity in town. We don't have a lot of diversity in this town, and diversity always has, benefits to it.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Rachel.
I was just gonna say, like, and diversity can look a lot of different ways, be it in terms of age and socioeconomic background. They're all different ways, and as someone who grew up in Newburyport and recently moved to West Newbury, I've lived in West Newbury when I was younger too. Even finding the money to move to West Newbury was incredibly challenging, because I can't afford to live where I'm from anymore. I can't afford to live in Newburyport anymore, so this issue of affordability as a local, the more units that are available doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be increasing affordable housing, right? But we're increasing access to housing, which then in turn doesn't create such a huge spike in housing prices moving forward, because there are more available units. So I guess it's more probably units that are maybe under the median price point, which is in the 700s at this point. That's more of what we need in this town. And if we can make it economically feasible for builders to do so, all towns could use that, not just West Newbury. So
if I agree, we need more housing in general, and I think that by zoning certain areas high density, it's not going to make any of them affordable. It's going to be supply and demand. There'll be smaller units, and the price per square foot is going to be astronomically high, and it's not going to meet that need. But if I could take a right turn a little bit and say, and I don't know if this is feasible, if some of that is town-owned property that is also zoned for the high density, and then the town could put an RFP together that says we have 7 acres that's high density, and we'd like RFPs to go out as long as 30% of them are affordable and set a price on that. It could accomplish two things at once. And I don't know if that's achievable with this regulation.
But the thing about establishing this high density too is that we're isolating all these people in this high density block. That's not the way our town works. We're spread out all over the place. And even some of the cottage communities or the, what is it called? Once a Meadow, Ocean Meadows. Yes, we call it Once a Meadow because we knew it as a meadow. But anyway, they're a community unto themselves, for instance. And this high density is going to, I think, push things in the direction of these people not being of the town as much as they could be if they were spread out more locally. I think that's a social factor that's quite important.
Well, that's a good segue to the next question, and really what we're going to focus on next week is, so if we're trying to continue the social and environmental physical patterns of the town, which you all know and love, what's the best place to locate multifamily housing? Do we try to put it in a central location so it shares in the life of the community? Do we spread it around in chunks in every neighborhood so that even though it's a different kind of housing, it shares the landscape of the rest of the town and everybody sort of can benefit from that or share the impacts? There are impacts. So I'm going to put up like that map that Dylan showed. I can find it.
But aren't the assumptions that you have to put this close to services and transportation? Transportation we don't have, not even a bus stop. Services are very meager. You absolutely need a car to live in this town. Or a very fast scooter.
So yeah, I mean that's obviously throughout the town you are car dependent, and probably regardless of that, if better public transportation comes in the future, it's probably going to be focused on Main Street and any other streets that are connecting to major regional routes. So given that, again, do we look at one of these properties or several of these? Are there other sites that might be good candidates?
How much of the All Saints is it issued? Just the church parcel or across the road where they have the big acreage?
This is primarily just the church parcel. So
okay. Well, that church is an historic little church. I would hate to see that go.
Yeah, we drove and looked at that, and there's a modest amount of space that's available for housing, possibly redoing the existing community building they have there for housing. So that's an example of something that could chip away, 10 to 20 units on one site with its own septic, and then have other parcels that could take a portion of it. Other thoughts?
Peter, the area that's shown in yellow is where the church is now, though, I think. I'm having difficulty refining the view there, but it looks like it's just at the front of the property, is it?
Yeah, they have a deep property. The back of it seems to be wetlands, but there's the old community building could be redeveloped, and there might be some other additional land. So not a big opportunity, certainly not as big as the Dunn property, the Mullen property, or Dunn's Field.
Can I just get clarification? The Dunn property, is that where women's health care was many, many years ago? Can someone?
No.
No? Okay. Where is it? I'm trying to figure it out.
It's an area, it's got
the cornfield, isn't it, pretty much?
It's got some greenhouses.
Oh, no, that's Knapp's.
No, that's Knapp's.
That Dunn. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. You're talking about that.
Yeah, there's
two.
two.
The Dunn, yes. Oh, yes.
So, Peter, you're referring to the Dunn property where the greenhouses are.
But it's right near there.
I'm talking about the one across from Church Street that he has on that.
It was a nursery, sold plants.
Yeah, it goes, there's a couple of more
Oh, so there's
residential scale
two-
buildings.
There's two greenhouses that are on the map then? Because I
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, that was my confusion, because I know the Knapp greenhouse, because we lived on River Meadow many, many years ago, so like I know that, but okay. All right, thank you for the clarification.
So, I mean, all three of those sites, the Knapp greenhouse, the Dunn property, and the Mullen property are, pretty close, I guess, walkable distance to kind of the traditional town center. So is that make them preferable because they're closer to the action there? Obviously, they have good access to the street, fairly close to the library, the schools.
And the market is there.
And the market.
Yep.
Yeah. But the market is a mile from the library. Well, our town is very weird in that we have our cultural center, if you will, the library, and our municipal center with the town offices, and then the service center with the market, et cetera. They're all spread out along Main Street, within a mile distance.
The Knapp, the Dunn property, the Mullen are all within walking distance of that downtown area. And even within the library, all of those are appropriate.
Well, you still have to walk a mile to the library, but the other services are right there. You're correct.
Right.
Do we know the acreage of the buildable land from the Dunn property and the Knapp greenhouse?
That's a good question, but we'll probably know that next week. And we're going to have some detailed maps that we'll be looking at in person.
One of those is listed now, is it not, for sale?
Yeah.
Yes, Knapp is on the market.
Yeah.
I think Knapp is a little under 20 acres, but only about half of it is not wetland.
Right.
Well, in theory, then just classifying that one property would satisfy the requirements of this law.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the big, when you look at this map, there's a lot of yellow, a lot more than a lot of people would believe, I think. And, I do like the idea of like spreading things out throughout the town, but at the same time, we are in theory only required to have 6 acres become classified this way or rezoned this way. A lot of people get very defensive. People become not in my backyard kind of people about properties that have come up at times in the 6 years I've been living here. And it makes sense to bookend the market, so to speak, because people could walk to, the grocery store, and, it makes sense to be on the Main Street because in theory, the Merrimack Valley bus routes could come through and, provide public transportation. Because if you look back to the heart of this matter, that's what's driving this is public transportation. In theory, we're in this situation because we live close enough to the commuter rail station in Newbury, right? And I think Gene made the good point that we are a car community. The walkable score on Zillow or whatever else you look at for real estate is extremely, extremely low. And, in theory, if you need to be close to the commuter rail, that lower right, there's some yellow still there too, that southeastern corner. There's yellow there, but even though it's closer to the commuter rail station, you're still going to need either a bus route to start up there, going from that area to the commuter rail, or you're going to need a car. So it's challenging, but in theory, that one property, hits the nail on the head.
And that property, I believe, has deed restrictions and agricultural restrictions that would probably prohibit it from being developed in the manner in which it would be rezoned.
Right.
So then would it satisfy it? How would that satisfy us zoning that area if it already has a deed restriction, which makes it unusable? So then you're saying, oh yeah, we'll allow this here, right? But the property we've selected, actually, it can't even be used for that. So it's kind of like it's just satisfying it to satisfy it and not trying to do anything that could potentially improve the community, in my opinion.
Right. Well, certainly, if it can't be developed because there's a restriction, it won't comply, so it won't.
Okay.
use
But
it. So
it could be an agricultural restriction that if somebody wants to pay the back taxes and all that, they can redevelop it. So
Yeah, chapter
Oh,
six.
The first
chapter
goal has to
61.
be to be in compliance, so we don't lose money as a town from mass work, and that is the bottom line that we have to be worried about. Should we care about improving density and improving affordability? Absolutely, but we first need to care about that, so we are not in 20 at the end of 2025 going to be shut off from mass works programs which fund things like repaving of our roads. If you look at our budget, very little money annually is put into repaving our roads, because ultimately most of the money that repaves our roads is actually state money, and that would be gone. And then who knows what the Attorney General could come and take civil action against this too. So if that's on the table. So and the point was also made that at the end of the day, this does not really do much of anything in terms of putting us in compliance with affordability. It was 89 units, multifamily units.
87.
87, excuse me. And then, but then still, to be in compliance, to be protected from 40B, it takes 113 units. So we need even more in terms of affordable housing. We are way off in terms of being where we're supposed to be in terms of state regulations for both of those things.
right, we can be in compliance to meet the letter of the law, and then we can look further to be in compliance to be the intent.
That's right.
Well, to your point, Nathan, just one of these properties, if you rezone it 50 units an acre, probably could comply with the law. But while we're at it, should we be looking at rezoning more of them in order to promote?
I mean, you could. I think
affordable
I think it won't pass town meeting. I mean, if you pick Knapp's Greenhouse, Dunn property, some of that stuff in the lower right, All Saints, and the stuff across from All Saints, you pick it spread out in 4 locations like that. I think you'll have a hard time passing town meeting.
Yeah. And also, just a small point. When we initially started talking about Dunn, I said Dunn was a field, and indeed it is, and that's what's commonly, I think, in town referred to as the Dunn property. And then you have this other Dunn nursery that is a large property, and I don't know whether that's currently for sale now, but I know the people have gotten older and stopped doing as much as they used to.
Well, and it's good to know that Dunn Field, there, when it was originally purchased, was purchased with the intent to potentially be a future use in terms of a school building someday.
Exactly.
If age is not a viable site anymore, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I would just say distinguish the two a little bit more so that we know that we're talking about 2 different properties, because some people might confuse Dunn property as you have it with the Dunn Field.
Yeah, we'll
property.
clarify that. So obviously, a lot of you spend a lot of time at town meeting probably. What is the objection that's likely to come up? And how, if you agree, how is it that we convince town meeting that rezoning for multifamily housing is a good thing?
Yeah, well, sometimes it just can't be done. I know that there were 80 acres right near me that, well, first they wanted to do a solar farm, and we shot that down. And then the developer came in. He was already had 2 sets of properties in town that he had developed, larger properties. And we eventually shut him down too. Thank goodness. The neighbors got together and bought up the property. And then the town bought some of it. The desire was not to have a 40B development there.
The complaint will go back to what Gene's point was before, and my other point was that a lot of people get very defensive about the rural character of the town, that not in my backyard, all that kind of stuff, and people will basically want to do the minimum when it comes down to it.
Yeah,
that's my gut.
But it's
not to say that it's right, but that's what
I get it.
will
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, but you have to balance here. It's not just housing is needed. Yes, I agree with that. But trees are also needed. For heaven's sakes, they keep telling us that a healthier environment has trees and green stuff. And if we build it all, pave paradise and turn it into a parking lot, we're going to be the unhealthier for it. So that it's not just, I like to live in a rural community. It's much healthier living. There's a whole study recently came out that I read today about noise and light pollution. Fortunately, in this area, we don't suffer from that. Air quality, another thing that's important going forward. And we're fortunate to have all of the good quality air and little light pollution and noise pollution in our town. Why should we invite that? Can't we do housing in a way that does not bring all of that upon us, which is antithetical to everything that we want as residents?
Does that imply that choosing sites that have already been disturbed and aren't part of large undisturbed forest blocks would make more sense?
I think so, and you have to do the main street for the services. I think it's also unfair to put people who in a dense development that's nowhere in town. Services are needed, although the market is expensive. I use it a lot, but not for my major shopping. I mean, all we have in the center of town is the market, a bank, a post office, and you can buy a slice of pizza and have a picture framed.
And take photography classes.
Well, yes, that's true.
I think that anyone who's moving to West Newbury, I mean, unless they're in an unfortunate situation where they can't afford a vehicle, like you're gonna have a vehicle in West Newbury, like it, you know.
Okay, so that brings up traffic. Now we have several hundred more cars. I mean, that was the problem with the 40B that was proposed. It was one of its points of egress was going to be on Coffin Street, which is a very small country road where two cars can't pass very well, and that's without snow. And to put in, that was going to be 90 some units, several hundred more cars. It just doesn't work for our town in certain places, and that was one of them.
Yeah, I think
So
oh, go ahead. Sorry, Jean.
No, I was just going to finish up. Traffic is a concern, as is water and sewer, even though the state says it isn't. It is. Sorry.
Peter, if I can ask a question.
Sure.
So someone asked a good question during the presentation about, which of those towns with those developments was a place that was on towns, or was on septic, not on town water, and you guys weren't sure. I think that's a good thing to investigate more, so we can see what is more akin to what our town is like and what these developments might look like, relying on the fact that they're going to require septic. And it would just be good to have more information like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There are many developments that are beautifully designed, that are on septic, but they tend to be off by themselves, sort of a cluster in the woods, because that's sort of how it ends up playing out. You need a big enough land to find septic. Available parcels are typically off on the edge of town, and sort of the whole process tends to push development to the outskirts, to the big developable parcels.
I mean, I first heard of this when the requirement was going to be the 500 units, and I'm grateful to hear that things have changed dramatically from then. I think that when people hear 15 units on an acre of land, I mean, I own a little bit more than an acre of land, and it's hard to imagine 15 units on my property. But with that being said, what I can imagine in maintaining the culture of our town would be houses that are. I saw there was a photo in your presentation about one that was like a single family home that got converted into a 2-unit or a 3-unit. That seems like it would make sense, and we see that in surrounding communities too, like Merrimack, where there are what either were single family homes or were built to be 2-family homes to begin with, can have multifamily use.
Just one point on the septic that you mentioned, Nathan. It's not only the fact of the septic, but the type of septic. Going back to that 40B development that was proposed near me, they were uphill, first of all.
Right, and that's why that failed.
Yeah, and the kind of septic had a pumping. I think it was Ray who called out the fact that this kind of pumping mechanism it required failed a lot. And those of us downhill who rely on wells, we're kind of wondering, okay, what's going to happen with this sewer, this septic system?
I just want to point, I lived in a development in Salisbury that had a common septic with a pump. During the pandemic, there were some issues with it, getting clogged just because people's children were home flushing diapers down the toilet and wipes and all sorts of stuff. But for the most part, as long as it was maintained, it was fine. It was fine.
Yeah, this was a
The situation Gene is
special
talking about is a little bit
mechanism.
different just because of like
Yeah,
where
no, I
the
know. I'm
top
just
is being
saying.
so steep. It was just really different. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Title V does a good job of mandating design on
Correct.
sewer and septic, and
Yeah.
to Nathan's point, that if you put 15 units on 1 acre, your septic would exceed, on a conventional design, your septic would exceed the size of your property. So you'd have to have a hybrid system, and there are provisions in Title V for that, but Title V protects that density.
Yeah, I mean, it's often pointed out that, you know, having like with 2 acre zoning and everybody on their individual septic system typically don't have a very high level of treatment, and the impact on water quality can be worse than if you have smaller units on a smaller piece of land with a higher end shared system. So to some extent, you know, having clustered development with a small package plant, say, you get much better treatment of nitrogen and other issues.
Plants,
I have another question.
With reporting requirements on package plants are very highly regulated.
What's the likelihood that these units will require town water versus being able to be tied into a well per se? Is it 100% expected they absolutely will need town water, or is there a chance that they would be on a well system?
I don't know the details of what typical well pumping is, but very frequently this level of development can be accommodated on a private well. We're working on a project in Stowe, which is going to be an affordable housing project that's part of a large conservation project, but actually it's almost 200 units, and they're drilling 3 wells to serve that and building a package plant as well. But it's the sort of a level of development that it can support that investment. But it's within a protected area of 300 acres. So there's, again, as Gene suggested, there's a balance between about 25, 30 acres of development and the rest of it being protected. Are there any other areas, before we go back to the main group, are there any other areas that we should be looking at for next week in terms of exploring some of these possibilities?
Peter,
Talk about the Mullen property, Peter. You know, that's the one that was previously looked at. You know, I got to say, as far as the topography goes, you know, the Dunn property, the Knapp property, the Mullen property, the All Saints Church property, it's much better than, you know, what, like Gene noted, we were dealing with on Coffin Street, which was a disaster. You know, that would have been a terrible place to develop. So at least these are, you know, they're on 113 and they're relatively flat. And I think they're all on town water.
Can town water take that though? That's another thing.
That's the study that they're doing right now. And it's high time for it because, you know, just to go back to that adverse 40B development on Coffin Street, they were making the claim that the town had the capacity to serve that development, which none of us, Ray and myself, no one agreed with them. And we disputed that, but we just didn't have the data. So now we'll have the data to determine how much capacity we actually have and what we need.
Is the city sewer only, I mean, water only along Main Street?
No, it's
okay.
Yeah, it's like where you and I currently live on River Meadow. Actually, you know, this is on town water. So some of the newer subdivisions are like this whole subdivision area down here is all on town water. Everything down by the schools on town water. the new
Okay.
school.
Looks like we're getting kicked
Yeah,
out.
just one more thing before we do. There is a big area down by Route 95, but there's nothing there. That's our so-called industrial area,
Right.
but it's open for business.
Sue, did you have a point?
Yeah, I just wanted people to know that we do have an interface with the water study that's going on. So once we kind of think about a site, we will be checking in with the consultants for that and get the answer to the questions about water. So I just wanted to let folks know about that.
Thank you.
Well, this has been very helpful. And hopefully,
We're feisty in West Newbury.
We appreciate you being here.
Democratic process.
hope you come back next week.
Recording
What
in
you're doing.
progress.
This counts for excitement. All right, it looks like pretty much everybody is back for breakout groups. The group I was with, I thought a very interesting and productive conversation. So I hope the rest of you did as well. We're gonna briefly have the facilitators share what they heard. It's obviously going to be a very brief summary. We've all taken notes, so you can trust that we hear what you're saying. It looks like I'm recording, so we're all set there. So let's see here. My group had a lot of questions about the details of, how this works. Like if we zone something and it's not really possible to build 15 units per acre, does that really mean we're compliant? Yes, it does. Or ask questions about affordability requirements and so forth. And then we talked a bit about the potential location for the housing, and I think that some of the factors I heard were that it would make sense to put it in a place that has town water, that it would make sense to put it in an area where there's enough land that the development can be back from the road a little bit. I think I heard two things there, although one of them was stronger than the other. So one of them was maybe the idea of it being less visible from the street, and the other was the idea of being surrounded by nature. So if I was living in there, I would want to be surrounded by trees and have access to open space and access to trails. So that was one of the factors. At least one person talked about how it would probably be appropriate to put it on a main road that has the capacity for more traffic, and possibly toward the Newbury port end of town, with the hope that there would be more people going that way, and so less people going through town. And I think the final thing I want to say is, I asked people if they could see a benefit for multifamily zoning changes, and it seemed like people could potentially imagine a benefit, which would be that your community could stem the decline in population, that you could have potentially more young people, more young families, and also more flexibility for older people to stay in town and not to be forced out because there isn't housing that meets their needs. So I think there's this, there's something I've heard a couple of times about sort of multi-generational ties, that West Newbury, used to be a place that had big tracts of land that were owned by families, and that's somewhat eroded since a lot of those properties were developed. But I think there's still a sense of West Newbury as a place with a history that's deep and a community that wants connections with other people, where people want to be connected to other people. And so this might enable that to continue, as well as potentially reducing pressure on some other open spaces. In my group, I know I didn't hit everything you said. I did take a lot of notes. Is there anything really crucial that I missed that you want to fill people in on? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to ask Jack to report out.
Right. My group talked about some of the changes in the past few decades. My group had a mixture of people, folks who had been here since for 40 years and who had moved here in the last 3 years. But some changes noted was the loss of agricultural land, which comes with losing some rural character in town and some of the viewscapes. And then the mention of loss of age diversity with young children and young families, losing some vibrancy in the town, and increase in pricing, housing prices. There was there was concern about that if this law would not actually alleviate affordable housing needs, but just produce expensive multifamily housing, which has been seen in Newburyport. What would actually allow these changes to encourage more affordable housing was a concern or question, and there was interest that this anything that was developed from this rezoning could result in amenities that were open to the public that the whole town could enjoy. So things like playgrounds, mixed use zoning with attractive public spaces and markets and places where people can hang out, and also some design interests was to try to match any new development with existing architecture in town. And there are some examples of that offered in Amesbury, Cider Hill, and Powell Hill development, and in Newburyport, Oleo Woods. And let's see, final, maybe some interest and opportunities again in mixed use development. Maybe providing a sewage treatment plant near downtown if there was a way to do that, but it would be complicated and expensive. There was definite interest in some of the town-owned properties for where this the zoning could go, Mullen and Dunn, but also interest in maybe using private properties for this and encouraging more affordable housing on the town-owned land. But overall interest in not blocking view sheds and trying to have the housing fit in with the existing character. Dylan, you're muted.
Eli, you want to go next?
Sure. We had a great conversation. A common refrain was that I think a lot of people felt like West Newbury hasn't actually changed so much in the last, few decades. A lot of people were excited about the possibility of adding what would hopefully be more affordable housing options, although there's definitely concern that this still wouldn't be very affordable, specifically relating to workforce housing for teachers, fire department, nurses, and also a way for there to be some intergenerational living and a way for people's kids to stay in town or be able to move back to town. So having a variety of housing options was something that a lot of people were expressing interest in. The Mullen property was something that people were really interested in. We had a question that I could not answer about if that is eligible to be rezoned since it is owned by the town. So we are eager to learn the answer to that.
I think the answer is yes.
Okay, great. The I'll just say the Knapp property, the former Knapp florist, which is currently for sale, was also brought up in the Dunn property as well. And the YWCA new housing development in Ipswich, was given as an example for an interesting project that had a lot of different housing types. And also kind of a discussion about just the need to break up bigger houses into more multifamily and get more units that way without increasing the number of houses. Yeah, hope I represented our conversation pretty well.
Anybody from Eli's group or Jack's group want to fill us in on crucial things we missed? They missed?
Just that the YWCA project was in Newburyport.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. And Ipswich had a variety of houses. They were probably built in the 70s, so it's, you know, stylistically not what we might do, but you know, some were Cape, some were 2-story, some were apartments. A nice mixture of options there, and all rental housing.
All right, Peter, you want to?
Good. Does that lead to me?
Yep.
All right. I think, well, we echo a lot of the same points. I think there was general consensus that there's a need for housing for young people, for working people, and pretty much everybody who doesn't have the income to afford the median price home, which is, someone pointed out, up in the 700,000s. There is a range of opinions in our group about how best to balance that with the need to protect forests and the environment and the precious resources of the town. And it was pointed out that that's definitely going to be a major subject at town meeting and beforehand, with people who have risen to the occasion previously to fight projects that they didn't agree with, and invested in purchasing properties and supporting town purchase of properties and so on. So as I keep asking people, the question is, and I think what we have to convince town meeting is, how do we make this housing something that's really an enhancement to the town? And I think that's a question that we're going to start exploring in more detail next week, using some of these properties. So how can we arrange this so it actually is something, yeah, I'd like to live there, and no, it's not going to have a horrible impact on the town. And if we can achieve that, we'll be getting somewhere. But back to our group, I think there was general agreement that because of the narrow roads in the south part of the town, the lack of good soils for septic, lack of, you know, the narrow roads and so on, probably the place where this makes the most sense is along Main Street, taking advantage of the properties that were identified already. I think was interest expressed in really looking hard at the town-owned properties like the Mullen lot, and seeing how those might be used to do this. And I think there was a request that we really provide more examples of kind of multifamily housing we're talking about in towns like West Newbury that don't have septic or sewer systems, and to talk about explore how those worked, how they made those happen. Anything else my group would like to emphasize?
We also pointed out that there was a big area down by Route 95, the so-called industrial area, that was unused, unbuilt, but not near anything.
Right. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I think we've mentioned a number of times there's going to be a design workshop next week. It starts at 6 p.m. and it is at the Town Hall Annex. It's going to be fun. So we do those workshops as sort of an interactive design thing where we try to give you the tools to tell us how you want your community to be designed, how you want places to look and feel, and to really engage with the planning. So today was more talking, and that will be more doing. So please do come back. Tell your friends and neighbors to come back. Tell your worst enemies to come. We want to have a diversity of opinions there. We want to have all the range of people who live in West Newbury, so that we know what really matters to everybody.
Question, if you have a previous conflict with that date next week, is there still a way that you can provide input?
You are welcome to call us or email us or call Sue Brown, the town planner. And we're happy to talk to you anytime.
And will the outcomes of that session next week be made public?
Yep. Yep.
Thank you.
You're
And,
welcome.
and Dylan and all, I just want you to know that we're working on a way to record that as well. It's not as easy as recording a Zoom meeting because there'll be people will be moving, but we are looking to do our best to try to somehow record the goings on that evening. So, and we will post that to the project webpage.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. I think the planning board has a couple of items they probably need to finish up.
Yeah, we do, and I just wanted to express my thanks to you, Dylan, Peter, Jack, and Eli for a great effort tonight. And there was a lot of good information passed along, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks.
And yes, we have a few things on planning board agenda, so anyone's welcome to stick around, but we'll get through our couple of things. Okay, so let's see. I think for us, the next item's minutes. And Sue, the minutes I had were the April 18th. Is that correct? I didn't see anything later than that, unless I missed it.
Hold on, Dylan. I just want to make sure you give hosting capability back to me so I can share.
I did.
Perfect. Thanks. All right, you're excused.
All right.
Thanks so much. I'm sorry, Brian. Yes, I think.
So yeah, the 18th, right?
Did she really give you the? Okay. Yes. Do you need me
that's
to
all well,
pull those up? I think the intent was to get more out, but it may just
we
be
did.
that.
Okay, and that's fine. Yep. So hopefully people have read those, but if not, it was fairly short. So maybe if we can get that up, you can.
Let's take a quick look again.
Go through it.
Right, I'm going to give this a try.
Success.
Yep.
I can't. Oh, good.
Yep.
Is it large enough?
A little bit bigger if we.
Let's see if I remember what Ray taught me. Evidently, it's not working. Push down on the.
Hold the control and then scroll the wheel.
Oh, it was the control that I forgot. Whoops. Better?
Yes.
Okay. We'll get past the act and there you go.
Anybody have comments they need to share?
This is very picky. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there was something that I think there was one on the second page where you might have said placement on items or future agendas. Yeah, it was just that was blank. Is that there were none as well?
Oh, maybe.
Go back. I don't remember. Generally, we just discuss it. I mean, we could say something like, items were identified and assigned to dates or something. It's usually pretty boilerplate and scheduled or whatever you want to call it.
Sounds good. Any other changes? No, hearing none. Move to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Ann Bardine, aye.
Ray Cook, aye.
Deb Hamilton, aye.
I was kind of waiting for Tim, but Brian Murphy, aye.
Did you not hear me, Brian?
No, we didn't. If you did,
Right.
so you approve that? Yeah.
I do approve. Yes.
Okay, 5-0. That's great. Okay, Sue, any correspondence that we need to talk about, or?
I believe there was one bit of correspondence and notice from Haverhill. Let me see if I can.
She sent
Withdrawal
it.
of that project, right?
It was a project for, what is it, for multifamily? They were going to rezone something for multifamily. Was that what it was?
Right.
Yeah, that was the only correspondence, was the
Yeah,
hearing
okay.
notice from Haverhill.
Okay, no problem. And administrative details of the inspection report on 519 Main Street.
Mhm. Yes, so Mike was there when they were putting in the swales along the roadway. Michelle stopped in today. Michelle Green said she thought it looked good, as well as now that it was more completely done. So I think we're on track.
It looks much better driving by it anyway.
Yes.
Well, it does, those nifty little trenches with the gravel and the
Yeah.
whatever on each side, very tidy. We'll see how it holds up.
Right.
Well, that's going to get grassed or something, isn't it? Wasn't that the idea?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I would assume.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I guess I was thinking more like how it functions, actually.
I know.
Water goes in and gets slowly absorbed and all those good things.
Yeah, I know.
It's just
Anybody
still
else?
waiting for his as-built plans, unfortunately, so I think that's been a while too, so.
Yes, that is kind of strange because there were 2 or 3 things that he wasn't able to witness because he wasn't notified and he's still
Right.
waiting for the as-built. So, yeah, he keeps carrying that in his report. I don't know whose obligation it is to nudge the developer, but.
Do the as-built those wouldn't be anticipated until it was finalized, everything is finalized, or did he ask for as-builts?
Well, I think he asked for them because he had not been notified to observe the construction. So maybe you can coordinate with him to see how he'd like to pursue it.
Yes.
Yeah, and you don't, I mean, his site guy, he changed site developers as well. I think the fellow originally passed away.
Yes.
So maybe there's some conflict, I don't know. But yeah, probably at some point you could shoot him a note.
Great. I would like to bring up on that particular property, Michelle, our conservation agent, asked today, because the town does not hold the easement for the trail easement for that property. She would like, but she's working on that, and it looks like it may need to be verified if it can be built where it is or can be installed where it is located. She's wondering if you recall any conversations about what level of finish the developer would have to the trails. Was it just he agreed to mow or mark? Was any base intended to be put down? Do you all have any recollection of what was anticipated to be the trails?
I'm hoping it's in the decision.
It isn't.
Right.
It isn't. I was wondering if there was maybe something that was provided as a document.
Because, yeah.
The location is determined, but it just isn't a discussion about what does that actually mean. Yes, he'll develop the trails. To what level of?
Yeah, because this is after we had the questions on the cottage with the wood chips that were floating away. And,
exactly.
Whatever.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if we didn't have language someplace.
Well, I mean, we could try, it's a little bit arduous, but look at some minutes, that were in some of those meetings where it was discussed, but boy, yeah, I'm sorry that didn't make it into the decision.
Yeah, that's okay. I will continue to look if you feel that there's something that there was some level of specificity discussed, then we'll look back.
It was kind of theoretical in a way at the time. There were existing trails that were kind of informally being used, and they didn't really connect up to anything. Now we have that on the property, so they will. But we did talk to him about it.
Okay.
Right. And he was very accommodating. Who does it say holds the trail easement? Is it
It is ECTA.
All right.
Yeah.
So
we
might have an agreement with him and ECTA that would answer the question.
Yeah.
I'll look into that.
Or at
Thanks.
least some
Thanks, Deb.
active standards that could be relied on if that's who's holding it.
Okay. I think we feel like there's a limited time period before he sells the properties that he can
Right.
actually make those changes.
Yep.
Or make the changes as required. So thank you.
So what we should do is I should suggest to Carol Lloyd that she take a site walk with him, and I'll probably come too,
Yeah.
and see what stage it's in.
Yeah. And coordinate with Michelle Green, because as our new conservation agent, she's now, as of July 1st, will also be doing much more in terms of land management. So that is one of the things that she's been involved with. So
good.
Oh, very good. Okay.
Great.
All right. Thanks, Deb. If you can
Yeah. No.
follow up on that.
Sure.
Okay. Placement of items, future agendas. Is there anything there, Sue? The next meeting is what, in like mid-July, right?
Yes.
It's a month from now.
Yeah, I know that you wanted to continue the discussion of ADUs.
Yes.
And I've had several discussions with folks as a result of the flyer, the mailing that went out.
Good.
In this meeting. So I think it is good that we continue those discussions. So that's the one that immediately comes to mind.
There may be some follow-up from with Dodson and Flinker after the session next Tuesday. There may be things that we want to either discuss or provide or think about.
Sure, we'll certainly have an update.
And that is the 18th, right? I have it noted as a question mark, but that's, that could be just how I put it in. It is the 18th?
Yes, that's how it's posted, right? Or that's how it's
good. Okay.
Scheduled currently.
Okay, that's fine. Anything else on that topic?
I will do my planner's report, so there may be things that some other things that come up, but I can't think of anything we've committed to discussing.
Okay. All right. Items not reasonably anticipated. I have one item, and then we'll see if anybody else has something. And I sent you a note on this, Sue. The MVPC meeting last week, they announced that the housing production plans are certainly, the process is moving along. They have retained a group, a national group called Consensus Building Institute that will be assisting various communities and probably ours in terms of the public outreach portion. So they'll be getting, I'm sure, in touch with you. So the gal from MVPC, Lauren, yes. I don't think this is an imminent thing, but as I mentioned to you, Gerard Witten, the director, had experience with this group in 2 other communities. He was very impressed and at their success in generating outreach and interest. So that's
great.
That's the MVPC update.
And for anybody that wants to, our next housing production plan stakeholder meeting is tomorrow at 11. We do run that on Zoom. It's more about the internal coordination type meeting, but we will be talking about outreach that we'll be doing in the fall. So it will be timely to have that group on. Thanks, Brian. That's great news.
Okay. And anybody else have anything that was unanticipated to discuss?
No, I'll just say a follow-up to our group discussion, which was there's definitely abroad in the land some confusion about MBTA housing initiatives, ADUs, and now housing production plan will be another one. We just need to get our, keep our wits about us and have conformed messages and think about how we talk to people about all these things.
Right.
Yeah, the problem I think we've got here is we've got this Venn diagram. We've got all these overlapping things and people are getting lost in it, which, is understandable. I mean, especially when it comes to the difference between an overlay district onto private land or changing zoning on already town-owned land. So there's, that's a big deal.
Yeah, we have to remember to, just because we're nerds about this stuff, everybody else is not a nerd about it. And we have
So
to-
they have other lives, I guess. And,
Exactly.
they lead their lives differently.
Yeah, and
But-
this has real. I know you guys know this, but the political impact of misunderstanding here or misinformation is gigantic. I can
Yes.
see how somebody get the wrong idea in their mind, go onto Facebook, and then things would just explode on us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to
Yeah.
explain early and often and clearly.
Yeah, there's yes, this is a good start. We'll see how this evolves, and there is time. We do have time as they move forward in their process. Probably the one thing we didn't say was that most of their fee was paid before by a Massachusetts grant, which is more to the point of if you don't do these things, you get cut out of the grant processes.
Yeah,
and whatnot.
that's a good point. The other thing, a little takeaway here is I think the people are like, what was the deadline that he said was December something? 20?
Well,
2025 is the final
Yeah.
deadline.
And I think
Finally.
everybody goes, oh, we got plenty of time.
Yeah.
But there's
Doesn't
a
happen.
chance that the first time this comes up to a town meeting, it gets voted down.
Right,
Yeah.
right. They don't know
Yeah.
that we factored in the try, fail, try, succeed
Mhm.
Yeah.
method you've
Yeah.
experienced many times.
And
It's not
I
so
think
far off.
there's going to be, again, for, people who try to stay informed. It's not easy with, the press and whatnot these days. But as the tier one cities and towns that are directly impacted, their deadline is looming. And this will be there will be articles in the news about, the progress or lack of progress and whatnot. So that may play to our favor. We'll see. We'll see. I did want to mention, Sue, if you could be sure that Ian James is added to a distribution lists, for your information. I'm presuming that he'll be approved at the upcoming select board meeting next
yes.
week. And, we can all welcome him officially on board. I should have mentioned him when I did the introductions as
Oh, that's right.
pending approval. But yes, let's make sure he gets on the distribution. And if you could send all of us so we can add it to his email info. Maybe you could just send that to us.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for that reminder.
All right. Anybody else? No, all good. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, yes, from Deb. Everybody, aye. Brian Murphy.
Aye,
Aye. Okay, we're done.